I found the study room during my second year at university. I'd been struggling to focus in my cramped dorm room, and the main library was always packed with freshmen who treated it more like a social club than a place to study. The room was in the Humanities building's east wing, tucked away in a dead-end corridor that somehow always smelled of old paper and wood polish. Room 418, though I never saw it marked on any building map. The first time I walked in, I remember thinking it felt peaceful, like being underwater. The fluorescent lights buzzed to life automatically, revealing plain white walls, a solid wooden table, and 2 chairs. A single window looked out over the courtyard's oak trees. The room had that particular stillness you only find in spaces that have been empty for a long time. Perfect. For the first few weeks, it was exactly what I needed. I'd go there after my afternoon classes, spread out my books, and work until the evening security guard's footsteps echoed down the hallway, my signal that it was time to pack up. The quiet was absolute, broken only by the scratch of my pen and the occasional rustle of turning pages. Sometimes I'd look up from my textbooks and realize hours had passed, the light outside fading to purple dusk. I liked that I could spread my books out across the whole table, that no one ever interrupted me. I felt like I'd discovered a secret space that belonged just to me. On a particular evening in early October, I arrived to find the second chair pulled out slightly from the table, as if someone had recently sat there. I distinctly remembered always pushing both chairs in before leaving. It was a habit my mother had instilled in me. I told myself someone else must have found the room. It made sense. It was midterm season after all. Everyone was looking for study space. Part of me was even glad in a way, like I was sharing a secret with someone I'd never met. I left a note on the table. Great study spot, isn't it? Just remember to push in your chair when you leave. The note was still there the next day, untouched, but the other chair had moved again. Over the next week, I began noticing other small changes. My usual chair felt warm sometimes, as if someone had just vacated it. Once I found a coffee cup ring on the table, the kind that forms when someone sets down a paper cup without a coaster. I started leaving little notes asking about their day, or reminding them about keeping the space clean. But they were always untouched when I returned, though the signs of the other person's presence continued. I started noticing other things too. Sometimes when I was reading, I'd catch movement in my peripheral vision, like someone walking past the window. But when I looked up, there was never anyone there. I was deep in a psychology paper when I felt it, a slight shift in the air behind me, like someone had just walked past my chair. A prickling sensation crawled up my neck. I could have sworn I felt breath on my skin, soft and regular, coming from a point just above my right shoulder. I sat perfectly still, my hands frozen over my laptop keyboard, afraid to turn around. The sensation lasted perhaps 30 seconds, though it felt like hours. When I finally gathered the courage to look, the room was empty. But the other chair had moved again, this time, and it was pulled out and angled toward where I'd been sitting, as if someone had just stood up from it. That should have been enough to make me stop using the room. I wish it had been. But there's a strange thing that happens when you experience something impossible. Your mind starts working overtime to explain it away. I told myself it was just the ventilation system. Old buildings make strange noises, pipes settle. Air currents can feel like movement. I had papers due and exams to study for. I couldn't afford to lose my quiet study space over what was probably just my imagination. But things kept escalating. I started finding books on the table that I hadn't left there. Burial Customs of the Ancient World. Opened to a page about cathedral crypts. I assumed the other person had forgotten it, but when I checked the spine for a call number to return it, I found nothing. It wasn't a library book. The next day, the book was gone, but a different one had taken its place. Liminal Spaces and Dimensional Theory. This one was also unmarked. The pattern continued, each book more disturbing than the last. Paranormal Phenomena in Sacred Spaces. A History of Exorcism. None of them were library books, and none of them remained for more than a day. One afternoon in early November, for the first time, I found a note full of barely legible, spidery handwriting. It took me a while to even decipher it clearly. The note said, "Thank you for sharing this space with me. It's been so long since anyone stayed." I packed up my things in record time that day, but I came back the next day. Of course I came back. I had to. I had exams coming up, and this was my study spot. The last straw came when I was deep in my biochemistry notes when the temperature dropped. Not gradually, but all at once, as if someone had thrown open a window in winter. But the window was closed. It had always been closed. The cold settled around my shoulders like a wet blanket, and that's when I felt it. Breath on the back of my neck, warm and slightly wet, carrying the faint, sweet, sour scent of decay. I didn't move. I couldn't move. My pen was frozen mid-word on the page, my hand shaking so slightly I could barely see it. The breathing continued, slow and regular, for exactly 6 breaths. I counted them in my head, desperate to focus on anything else. Then it stopped, and the room's temperature returned to normal. So quickly, my ears popped. I got up and ran. Left my laptop, my books, everything. Sprinted up and down the stairs and didn't stop until I reached all the way back to my dorm room. I couldn't get my heart to stop racing for hours. The next morning, I did something I should have done months ago. I went to the administrative office. My hands were shaking as I explained to the clerk about room 418, trying to sound casual while describing the study room I'd been using. The administrator, Mrs. Sabrina, looked confused and pulled up the building plans on her computer. She studied them carefully, then turned the screen toward me, showing me something that made my blood run cold. The building renovation plans from their data showed no study room in that section, just a solid foundation wall. But that's impossible, I heard myself saying, my voice sounding distant and strange. I've been studying there for months. I trailed off, realizing I'd left all my books and notes in that non-existent room. Mrs. Sabrina took another careful look at the plans. There aren't any study rooms in the East Wing, she said gently, as if worried about my state of mind. I stumbled out of her office, my thoughts spinning like leaves in a storm. The room was real. I had notes taken there, coffee stains on my sleeve from drinks I'd balanced on those windowsills, dust from those armchairs on my jeans. Hadn't I? I pressed my fingers against my temples, trying to sort memory from imagination. Everything I'd experienced in that room suddenly felt like a dream I was struggling to hold on to after waking. Every memory took on a new, impossible dimension. But my books were still there. My laptop, my books, my notes, all sitting in a room that supposedly didn't exist. I couldn't just leave them. It took me 3 days to work up the courage to go back. 3 days of jumping at shadows, of second-guessing every thought, every memory. The door to 418 was still there, looking exactly as it always had. My hands were trembling so badly that it took multiple tries to turn the handle. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it, down to my scattered papers on the desk. But there was something new. A note written in that spidery, impossible handwriting. Missing our study sessions? Don't worry, I found a new room. Come join me. I grabbed my belongings and ran, not bothering to arrange them in my bag, without looking back and without a second thought, just clutching everything to my chest as I fled. I didn't stop running until I reached my dorm room, fumbling with my keycard, desperate for the familiar safety of my own space. But when I pushed open my door, I froze. My desk chair had been pulled out slightly to the side,